Well, this will be a nightmare. Let's continue the journey, shall we? The past month or so, I've been talking a lot about speech, censorship, and I'd like to move on to the next topic now, which is about how many genders there are. I want to talk about only two, and TERFs, and Tumblr genders, and ZZimzer. Some people have spammed literally every video that I've ever made about the nature of gender and sex with only two. Okay. Point taken. So I hopped on Twitter and asked those of you who do feel that there are only two, why you feel that way. And in even asking that question, I got, a little bit of backlash from the feminist side of things. It's problematic, or it's hurtful, or it's invalidating. And I understand why some people might find it upsetting, but I'm gonna talk about it because I feel that this conversation is really at the core of feminism. It's very relevant to sex ed. It's not just something that can't be discussed. The idea here is not to invalidate anyone's identity, anyone's experience of gender. It's to understand what the whole scope of those experiences look like and how they lead people to understand gender the way they do. I think it's fascinating and I want to talk about it. Feminists and anti-feminists alike, in the course of this conversation, you may very well find yourself disagreeing with some of the things that I'm going to say. And I say, cool. Tell me why. I'm open to other perspectives. I'm open to changing my mind on this stuff. I have before, but I need strong arguments. I need arguments that are logically sound, that are not based on emotions, arguments that are backed by science and data wherever possible, with strong study designs. And would absolutely get off to responses that address what I actually said. Oh my God, Lacey supports harassment. No. Oh my God, Lacey hates men. No. Oh my God, Lacey's a white supremacist now. Chris is the white supremacist, not me. Just a little low-key shade for you there. I see three political groups, three basic philosophies in this conversation about gender. Anti-feminists say there are two. Only two. Radical feminists say, well, gender doesn't actually really exist. And liberal feminists say, well, gender is infinite and it's expanding. How are we all looking at the same thing, at gender, and coming to such wildly different conclusions about it? That's the question, right? For starters, I'm not convinced that we are all looking at the same thing. Genitals, specifically. This is a penis and this is a vulva. In biology class, or maybe porn, we all learned that genitals are a part of human sexuality, in large part because they help us to reproduce. It's the survival of the species, right? Life on Earth, wow, so beautiful. There are basically two sets of equipment that allow humans to reproduce. That is male and female, XY and XX. That is basically sex. Basically. A more comprehensive account of biological sex includes 4 traits. You've got chromosomes, hormones, primary sex characteristics, and secondary sex characteristics. And there's a little variation here, right? Low key. You got, females that are infertile, you've got males that have more boobage, all that kind of stuff. Then you also have, about 1 in 2,000 people are intersex. They have both male and female bits. And another part of the variation is trans folks who will transition between male and female using hormones and surgery. What's notable about sex is that all mammals have one. The vast majority of mammals are either XX or XY, just like us. There are some animals that have traits from both. Just like us, there are animals that transition between sexes. But what's not just like us, what other animals don't have, in my book, is gender. Monkeys and tigers, they might be male or female, but they aren't men or women. Gender is the way that body sex is interpreted and understood in the world, in society. The American Psychological Association defines gender as the attitudes, feelings, and behaviors that a given culture associates with a person's biological sex. And this is the definition that is, widely used by experts. But when you look at the definition, it's kind of broad and subjective. Attitudes, feelings, behaviors, what does that even mean? And I think that this is one of the problems in this conversation, is that the same word is being used to refer to a million things. Gender sometimes refers to sex. How many genders? Basically 2. Gender sometimes refers to society's gender roles. How many? Basically 2. Gender sometimes refers to someone's outward gender expression. How many? Potentially infinite. Gender sometimes refers to individual gender identities. How many? potentially infinite. And gender sometimes refers to labels and pronouns. It's language. How many? Again, potentially infinite. Okay, so the word gender can mean a lot of things in this conversation. So I think it's good to be specific. Question now is, well, which one of these definitions of gender do we use when we're talking about things like sexism or transphobia, feminism, anti-feminism, gender differences in society? Well, this is where the anti-feminist, the radical feminist, and the liberal feminist schools of thought start to have some disagreements. Let's take a closer look, shall we? So I asked those of you who feel like there's only two genders to share why. And 53% of you told me there's only two genders because of biology. There's male, female, XY, XX. And it's not a complicated issue. This is fairly straightforward, and so on and so forth. Logically, let's walk through this. In its purest interpretation, gender equals biology implies that all of the differences that we see between men and women in society are ultimately the product of our bodies. We're slaves to our bodies, in a sense, and our social environment doesn't, play a hand in shaping who we are. If biology alone creates the differences between men and women, these differences should be universal throughout the human species across every culture. And it would also be constant throughout history, because biology, sex is the same all over the world. But when I look at the world, that's not what I see. I do see some variation. I see some common themes, some things that seem to be pretty widespread, but there are also a lot of differences too between cultures when it comes to gender, and certainly throughout history. How do we account for cultures where the gender roles are completely swapped? How do we account for cultures where there are 3, 4, even 5 genders? I'm not just making this stuff up. It's real and it exists in the world, and so we have to try to make sense of it. None of this is to say that biology plays absolutely no role in our behavior either. There was a meta-analysis that was done recently, which is always preferable because it looks at a whole bunch of studies at once. I think this one looked at about 45 different studies altogether. So this found that there were, 3 main sex differences that may be very heavily influenced by biology. However, for a lot of gender differences, the evidence overwhelmingly points to both some role of biology and of our social environment at once. So the next question then is, well, how much of our gender differences are biological versus social? To what degree does each play a role? And I think that is the interesting question. And I think that's a question that has to be asked on a case-by-case basis. Comparing male suicide to, women not being in STEM, there might be a connection there, but the context is different for each. And I think we have to look at all of that. That is, in a nutshell, why I think there is more to gender than just biology. But what I do like about this perspective, and what I do take comfort in, that I think a lot of anti-feminists and skeptical types take comfort in, is the fact that gender equals sex is, based on objective information. Sex is relatively easily observable, it's tangible, it's measurable, it's material. Sometimes it's nice to just have things be simple, The other only 2 reasons you guys gave me, the anti-feminists gave me, is 1, that multiple genders defines gender as personality. That was 16% of you. And 2, that multiple genders reinforces gender roles, another 16% of you. And there were actually 5% of folks who were all trans who said something similar, that multiple genders trivializes gender dysphoria. In perhaps an unexpected twist, there are feminists who would strongly agree with that. In part 2 of this video, I needed to split this up because it was just too much stuff. I'm going to talk about a very interesting tension, a conflict within the feminist movement about how to see gender. I'm going to explore the radical and liberal feminist perspectives and tell you a bit about where I fall in that mess. In the meantime, I want to know your thoughts. I'm reading my comments, I'm reading my tweets mainly. Twitter, like I said, is the main place I'm having this conversation off YouTube. Lastly, the first debate/conversation open forum thing, live stream, has been scheduled, but I can't confirm it just yet, but I will in the next video. I have 3 people who have very different views on this stuff, so I'm really excited to talk to them. I hope you'll join me. I think it'll be a lot of fun. I love you all. I will see you again shortly with part 2. Mwah.